This is a Formula One track that was stripped to pieces by looters and thieves, costing the city of Valencia hundreds of millions in damages. But this track never even hosted a race. These are just two abandoned Formula One tracks I gotta share with you. Like this circuit in Japan that was so dangerous it cost the lives of multiple people. Or this track in Belgium that was so long it had to be cut in half. But first, we have to talk about a track that held races in the middle of one of the biggest cities in Spain. See, in 2007, a Valencian politician by the name of Francisco Camps had the idea to bring F1 to Valencia in the hopes of a rebirth to the surrounding areas. And in July of 2007, a design was brought forth. A 25-turn street circuit with few straights that included a 460-foot swing bridge to complete the track was made ready by 2008 with the help of F1 track designer Herman Tilke. And 1 year later, the track was given its first action, when the Spanish F3 and International GT Open Series made its way to Valencia, proving that the track could truly be driven by high-powered motor vehicles. In August of that year, Formula One was brought to the new circuit. Ferrari driver Felipe Massa would be the first driver to truly master the track, driving a lap worthy of a pole position in qualifying. And he would be able to lead for most of the race and ultimately win the first installment at this track. But there was some controversy over his race. See, in the pits, he was released unsafely and right into the path of Adrian Sutil, and it was a miracle that the two didn't crash. However, he still kept the win, claiming the first victory at the new track. The F1 calendar would include the Valencia track all the way through to 2012, with Rubens Barrichello winning in 2009 and Vettel winning in 2010 and 2011. But after Fernando Alonso was able to win in 2012, it was clear that the track would quickly become abandoned. You see, the Valencia track didn't quite catch on, and due to a failed deal to alternate with the Barcelona venue and simply the government's unwillingness to take on the costs, F1 decided that the venue might not be for them and they left it abandoned. And leaving an entire F1 venue there to rot must look pretty good to looters and thieves, because they made a killing on it and stripped it for whatever it was worth, leaving it in disrepair. But now, let's move all the way to Korea and look at a track where fans simply were not interested. See, the Korean International Circuit was yet another track that was designed by Herman Tilke. Korea hoped that this new attraction of a Formula One race would revitalise the area and bring life to the Korean people, and so it began. In September of 2010, fans were able to travel to the track to check out the new attraction, when Red Bull brought a car show called Circuit Run 2010. And finally, after a few setbacks, Formula One made their way to the track. But it wasn't running as smoothly as they hoped. There were some construction delays, but even though it added a little bit of uncertainty to the track, there was no doubt that it would still go on, as it did, as a date of October the 24th was confirmed, after the FIA deemed the track good to race. But as 80,000 fans entered the venue, it was clear that it would be a tricky race, as some prior rain had caused some very wet conditions. The race was started under the safety car, but it was eventually stopped because the conditions were simply too tricky. After some time and some monitoring, the race was back on, but after another safety car start, Mark Webber would end up taking a shunt into the wall, taking out Nico Rosberg along with him. And the big deal about the crash? Mark Webber had been leading the championship prior to this race, and since this was the 17th of 19 races, it put him in a horrible position. But his teammate would also have a retirement whenever his engine blew up in the later stages of the race. The race proved to be interesting and exciting, with Fernando Alonso taking the victory, but that did not mean that it would have a permanent spot in the F1 calendar, because in 2011, Korea came to Bernie Ecclestone and F1 in search of a contract negotiation. You see, F1 races take a crap ton of money to put on, and Korea was not ready for the financial toll an F1 race would take. But still, the racing continued, and as the Sebastian Vettel and Red Bull era began, there was no surprise that they would go on to dominate from there on out in Korea. But even then, the track and the surrounding areas were not living up to the expectations. Eventually, Formula One had to end up scrapping the scheduled 2014 race, and they decided that it was time to move on. Even then, the Korean Grand Prix still gave us fans some memorable moments, like whatever this intro was that they put on for the 2012 race. or when Lewis Hamilton had a substantial chunk of AstroTurf stuck to his car. But it was just not meant to be, however. But don't be surprised if there is a return to the country in the future. But let's get on to the next one. The Belgian Grand Prix has become a fan favourite track, but many fans have no clue about what the track used to be like and how Formula 1 abandoned the old Spa-Francorchamps. While the current track is still the longest on the current calendar, spanning 7 kilometres, the one used prior was more than double the length at about 15 kilometres per lap. But it has much more history than your normal F1 track, and to tell it, we need to go all the way back to 1920. The track was designed by two men, Jules de Thier and Henri Langlois van Open, and starting off it was meant to revive the La Meuse Cup, but only one driver entered. Fast forward a couple of years and we have the first instalment of Grand Prix racing in 1925, with Antonio Ascari coming in first with a time of just below 7 hours. But Formula 1's championship did not begin until 1950, and when deciding which tracks to race, Spa was one of 7 lucky tracks to be raced in the inaugural season. Juan Manuel Fangio, 5-time championship winner, came out victorious in the inaugural championship race. And it was a truly exciting track. But there were some issues with it. You see, there'd been nowhere near the amount of deaths that there were back in the day, but back then driver safety was simply not as big of an issue. And for a long while, Spa was not equipped with enough safety modifications in order to ensure driver safety. Even now, the astounding Eau Rouge straight is daunting enough, but the old track was much more to deal with. But that's what racing drivers love, the thrill. Well, to a point. You see, in 1958, Archie Scott Brown died at Spa, and in 1960, 2 drivers passed away at the track, Chris Bristow and Alan Stacey. And that's when the safety questions came into play. Jackie Stewart finally led the F1 drivers to a boycott of the race in 1969. He himself would also come close to death in a scary crash in 1966, which is all the more reason to help tighten up safety. They would race there in 1970, but after that, it looked like it might be the end of Spa in F1, as the series moved on to some different tracks for the foreseeable future. But finally, in 1979, there were some major changes made, and the track was cut nearly in half, meaning we would no longer see the daunting, scary, and insanely long version of the track ever again. The new track is still very technical, and there still have been changes since the major rehaul, especially around the time that Senna tragically passed away at Imola. There have been gravel traps and tyre barriers, and small changes have been made to chicanes and such, but no change will be as great as the removal of what's now known as the old Spa-Francorchamps. Now, earlier we mentioned the Korean track that was shut down, but there was another track in Asia that was unsuccessful for numerous reasons. See, 1963, a group of Japanese businessmen had an idea to bring high-speed racing to Japan, and they had a brilliant location in mind. They formed a 4-kilometer long track near the iconic Mount Fuji, hence the name, the Fuji Speedway. And at the start, it was meant to help start up a Japanese NASCAR series, but after funds fell through, it was converted into a road course. And in 1976, after many lesser-known series races, Formula 1 was brought to the track in one of the most pivotal races in F1 history. Immortalised by the movie Rush, this race came to be the one that decided the 1976 championship between James Hunt and Niki Lauda. The race was rainy, and Lauda retired from the race just 2 laps in due to the torrential rain, and a freak crash earlier on in the season that left him permanently scarred at the famous Nürburgring. But in 1977, the nail was put in the coffin after a horrific event. During this race, Denis Villeneuve collided with Ronnie Peterson's Tyrrell and went off the track right into a field of spectators and race marshals, killing 2 in the process. James Hunt would go on to win the race with no difficulty, but the entire weekend had been overshadowed by this tragic moment, and F1, due to the tragedy, decided that it would be a better idea to go elsewhere after these episodes. But the Fuji Speedway was not gone for good, as it stayed intact with various other series racing at the track. Formula 1 would decide to go back to Japan almost a decade later, but they chose the Suzuka circuit, which is still being raced to this day, which hosted races such as the infamous 1989 Grand Prix, where Prost and Senna's rivalry was on full display. But even then, F1 decided to give Fuji one more shot, and in 2007 they signed a deal to return to the Fuji Speedway, which was now owned by Toyota. The Grand Prix, held in late September of that year, was a complete disaster. Overpriced food, overcrowded walkways, and an organisational nightmare where fans were not even allowed to bring flags not associated with Toyota or its drivers. When fused together, this experience made fans despise the race. Oh yeah, and the race. Well, it once again showcased torrential rainfall, leading to intense racing and a crash that led to the end of Fernando Alonso's championship campaign. You see, Toyota quickly realised their mistakes, and they made sure it would not happen again. They improved walkways, made screens larger, and helped make the fans' experience at least tolerable. And after a disastrous race the year before, it was actually Fernando Alonso who was able to take victory at the track. But little did he and the other drivers know it would be the last time they would race there. They were set to alternate with Suzuka for the foreseeable future, but all of a sudden Toyota pulled the plug, saying that their decision had to do with problems at the company and that it would be extremely difficult to continue holding F1 at the track. Although that was the last time that the track was used for F1, there have been other sporting events at the track, like some Olympic events just a couple of years back and some lesser known series of course. But in terms of F1, that's all we've seen of the track for now. But let's move across the globe now and look at this track that held F1 races in France back in the day. Although it didn't last too long, this track produced some legendary races, including one that was dubbed the Race of the Century. But we can get deeper into that later. This track was the Circuit de Reims-Gueux. You see, this track was another temporary track that was put on public roads in the wine country of northeastern France that would pass through the village of Gueux. The Reims-Gueux circuit was a simple one. It was a triangle-shaped track, but its long straights made for fast and entertaining racing. While the track would first be used as the second venue of a race called the Grand Prix de la Marne in 1926, the first French Grand Prix of the track would not come until 1936. After years of hosting races, it was no surprise that the Reims-Gueux would be added to the F1 calendar during the championship's inaugural season, and it didn't disappoint. Juan Manuel Fangio would win the first two installments of the F1 French Grand Prix at Reims-Gueux, but after a year off from Reims-Gueux, F1 would return. And that year, 1953, the track would make a name for itself and produce what some called the Race of the Century. But first things first, the track had changed a bit. You see, they had altered the track in 1952 to avoid the town of Gueux by turning a bit earlier, which in turn shortened the track. And due to this, the circuit's name would change from Reims-Gueux to the name most people often associate it with today, Reims. But for the race in 1953, they decided to make a 1.2 kilometer track extension, and F1 was back. Now, let me tell you about the race itself, because it was really incredible. Coming into the race, excluding the Indianapolis 500, that for whatever reason counted towards the F1 championship, Alberto Ascari had won 9 consecutive races. But to give his team some credit, the Ferrari 500 was definitely the car that everyone wanted to sit in. However, there was one challenger to Ferrari that had been creeping up on them, Maserati. And even though Ascari would end up on pole to start the race, 3 of the next 4 cars would be Maseratis. But even with Ascari at the front, Maserati had a strategy by starting Jose Froilan Gonzalez, their 5th place driver, with half a tank of gas. You may be wondering, why on earth would he do that? And here it is. Although starting with half a tank would mean that Gonzalez would have to pit for fuel, it also meant that he would be much quicker, and it showed, as he blazed past the field and into the lead, a lead of almost 3 seconds after just the first lap. The pack shuffled around with Gonzalez at the helm. But by the time Gonzalez had to pit, it was Juan Manuel Fangio heading up the pack. Fangio would come back to win in the next year. But then F1 would take a break from the track in 1955 and would race on and off at Reims until the 1966 season, when the last French Grand Prix at Reims was held. Some minor competitions would be held at Reims through 1972, but due to some financial troubles, the track would close permanently. Even now, you can find some remnants of the abandoned track with eerie grandstands and an empty pit lane, and with no chance of a major race happening ever again. But now, let's switch gears to a more recent track, and one that drivers actually really enjoyed. And for this one, we're going to India, a country that many new fans may not be too aware of when it comes to its history. You see, during the 2000s, the country of India had become more and more acquainted with the sport. In 2005, the first Indian, Narain Karthikeyan, made his F1 debut, and 2 years later, Force India was founded. And that's when Bernie Ecclestone and the Indian Olympic Committee made a plan to organise the building of the Buddh International Circuit, with his good friend Herman Tilke to help with design. The track was scheduled to be ready for the 2010 F1 season, but because of some construction delays, it would not be put to the test until the 2011 season. And by then, for Indian fans, a second Indian driver had made his way to the sport, a guy that many of you know as a broadcaster, Karun Chandok. The track was high speed and well received by the drivers and teams. Martin Whitmarsh, team principal at McLaren, thanked the designers, saying that they had created a truly excellent circuit. Jenson Button said that he really liked the circuit and that it was great fun to drive. But the driver to excel at the track was, to no one's surprise, Sebastian Vettel, winning every race that occurred at Buddh. And this is the track where Vettel secured his 4th straight title and where he famously bowed to his Red Bull. Everything seemed to be going smoothly on the new track, but there was just one bump in the road. Well, a little bit more than just a bump. You see, Buddh was placed in the national capital region of the country, and so it fell under some different guidelines. So, whenever a politician by the name of Akhilesh Yadav gave the claim that F1 was actually just entertainment rather than a sport, Formula 1 was not awarded the same tax exemptions as, let's say, cricket over there. Custom fees were also not waived, and Formula 1 started looking at things a little bit differently and started to lean further and further away from the circuit. It had already been announced that the Indian Grand Prix would not be featured on the 2014 calendar, but after, they also excluded it from the 2015 calendar, and it was clear that something was up. F1 hasn't come back to the track since, and a court ruling in 2017 stated that a tax would be levied at a rate of 40% on any business income made in India, so why would they? Since then, the circuit has hosted a few different racing series and championships, but unfortunately for the owners, because F1 had left after such a short time, they had to succumb to millions of dollars in losses. Unless taxation changes in the area, they'll probably will never get it back. But from one Asian country to the next, let's look at a track that was abandoned simply due to bad timing and maybe a little bit of corruption. The Hanoi Street Circuit was located on the streets of the capital of Vietnam. It was set to be the first major international circuit in Vietnam, and hopefully it was going to be a fun one, as it was designed by none other than Hermann Tilke. It boasted a 1.6 kilometer long stretch where cars could fly up to 335 kilometers per hour, and it was surely going to foster some terrific overtakes. But F1 picked a very unlucky time to schedule the first race at the new track, 2020, and we all know what happened that year. Now, there was just no stopping the pandemic, but fans still got to enjoy the track on the F1 2020 game. There were hopes that it would be on the 2021 calendar, and well, it was supposed to be, but you see, a major player in the Vietnam Grand Prix, Win Duc Chong, had been arrested on corruption charges, which caused the cancellation of the 2021 Vietnam Grand Prix. But one of the biggest problems with this came about because Chung championed and pushed for the sport to the national government, but when he was gone, no one really picked up the torch. And so, after getting cancelled for 2 straight years, the hopes of the race happening withered, and the track will remain in obscurity as a big what if. You know, how about we finish off with a bit of a bizarre track, the Avus Grand Prix circuit. I mean, just look at this thing. This 4-corner track was extremely interesting, located in Berlin, Germany, and it hosted its first German Grand Prix in 1926 when Formula 1 was called Grand Prix Motor Racing. Probably the most famous feature of the track was its extremely banked corners at 43 degrees, compared to Daytona at 31 and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway at 11 degrees. The track was 12 miles long, but after the 1926 Grand Prix, the German Grand Prix was moved to the Nürburgring, which is completely understandable. But of course, due to some world events, it would be a dormant track for quite a while after. That is, until 1951, when it hosted some F2 and F3 cars. The track length had been reduced, and we would actually see Formula 1 come to the circuit in 1959. The race would see 3 Ferrari drivers sweep the podium, with Tony Brooks at the top step, but that same weekend, Formula 1 would lose a driver, Jean Berra, in a horrific accident, and almost a second, Hans Hermann. This would be the last time that F1 would race at Avus. In fact, Grand Prix racing would decide to bar bank circuits due to the danger and risk that came with them. The last races on the track would come in 1998, but now it's become part of an autobahn, which is a high-speed German highway, and will go down as one of the most unique tracks to be raced on in F1 history. So these were some of the tracks abandoned by Formula 1. Now, make sure to like and subscribe for the best Formula 1 content out there, and check out these videos while you're at it.